All right. Hello, all you headbangers. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. Okay, so what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, I'm going to show you some more kind of obscure 7-inch singles, but not from the new wave of British heavy metal. No, this time we're getting over to mainland Europe, and we're going to look at some of the stuff that came out of Sweden in the early 80s. It's never been as well publicized as the British movement, but Sweden did have a very happening little heavy metal scene in the first several years of the 1980s. It's known as the first wave of Swedish heavy metal. So if you see like an FWOSHM acronym in some places, that's what it stands for. This one had some pretty big bands come out of it. Two of the better known ones are Heavy Load and Overdrive. They both made multiple albums that a lot of folks have had a chance to listen to. They've been reissued, so you can check them out. But there were also lots of smaller bands that only got to do maybe a single demo or a demo plus a single. And some of those bands are the ones I've chosen to highlight tonight. Couple of general things if you're interested in first wave of Swedish heavy metal. An excellent resource for this is the Corroseum website, and I'll try to include a link in the comments down below. This is a website that's been up and running for a long time now, back well into the early 2000s, and it is an excellent resource for delving into the really obscure parts of heavy metal record and CD collecting. These are the folks that dig up the demo tapes and the rehearsal tapes and the obscure live shows and ferret out the bands from all over the globe, not just the well-established scenes. They have sections on the Corroseum devoted to things like metal from the Eastern Bloc countries before the Iron Curtain came down, and Malaysian metal. And lots of stuff like that. It's mostly 80s and 90s metal, so not a lot of death or black necessarily, but that stuff's not off limits. I write reviews over there for a lot of the older 80s metal releases, so if you also want to read some of the stuff rather than listen to me jabber, you can check it out. I write reviews under the name Knight's Blood, which is a name I've used online for years. It's taken from the Dissection song off of Storm of the Lightsbane. Another resource, if you want to sit down and read instead of surf, there have been some books on Swedish metal. This is volume 2 of Swedish hard rock and heavy metal. Now, these books are a little hard to find. I don't think they've been republished lately. And the layout, they give you a little bit of information on band entries. Just flip to a random page here. They have a lot of information related to, releases, catalog numbers, and stuff like that. So it's a pretty good series. I don't have volume 1. I think volume 2 is essentially an update to volume 1, but I'm not certain about that. The book does come with a sampler CD. And at first that seems like excellent. You get to check out some of the really unheard of bands, acts that were kind of unsung at the time. And then though you start to look at the track list and it's not exactly that. It's some of the bands on here are much newer, things like Therion and Dan Swano. Yeah, that is technically Swedish heavy metal. It's not stuff that's very hard to find out anything about. You also have, Europe on here. Europe is from Sweden. Some people call them heavy metal, I guess. Nothing wrong with Europe. They had some good songs, but again, that's not really the kind of thing you're wanting to check out if you're delving into the subject like this. You want to find out about some bands you haven't heard of. One thing I will point out on the sampler CD track list right here, if we can get it close enough, right here, band number 7, Mustache. So Aaron, if you're watching this, buddy, they got you covered right there. All right. So yeah, the sampler CD was a bit of a disappointment. I thought they could have dug up some tracks that would have been a lot more interesting and a lot cooler to check out than what was chosen, but hey, I'm sure those things are difficult to put together, and something's better than nothing. Okay, without further ado, let's look at 5 singles. I've chosen some that I really like from the early 80s, and something else to point out here, I guess before we look at the first one, Sweden's heavy metal history kind of went through a weird phase in the middle of the 80s. So you had this first wave of Swedish heavy metal in the early 80s. A few bands did okay. Most of them stayed obscure. But then in the mid 80s, metal really sort of disappeared from Sweden for a few years. And I've heard some folks who collect this and know it a lot better than I do comment that it was related to the band Europe, sort of exploding in popularity and doing really well. And that caused so many other bands in the country to stop what they were doing and start trying to emulate the style that Europe was playing, which was, of course, much more geared towards commercial-friendly radio, top 40 MTV type music. And so you go through this kind of dearth of bands for a while until Sweden, of course, reinvented its metal scene as Nihilist and bands like that got themselves up and running and eventually became a hotbed for death metal in the end of the 1980s. Another thing I think that hurts the Swedish heavy metal scene a little bit in terms of collectors and reputation is some of the bands sing in Swedish instead of English. While there's nothing wrong with that, it does make it a bit hard for fans and collectors in other countries to get into the music quite as much. Now, some of these Swedish language bands were very, very good, and the music is really awesome. Natsvart did a single sung in Swedish that I really like. Jonah Quiz did an amazing demo sung in Swedish. If that had been sung in English, I think it'd be known as one of the best demos to have come out of Europe in the early 80s. But it's sung in Swedish, the song titles are in Swedish, and that makes it hard for anybody not from Sweden to understand what's going on sometimes. So that's a little bit of a knock against the scene, I think, and why it hasn't always been as popular or well circulated as stuff from the new wave of British heavy metal. But anyway, I promised records, time to deliver on some of those. Let's start with Heavy Load. Now that right there, that's how you do a picture sleeve in the 1980s. You got Teen Wolf rocking it out on the guitar, tearing off the shirt. This is their Monsters of the Night single from 1985. It's got I'm Alive on the flip side. This is one of the last releases the band did before they called it a day. This came after their third LP, so they'd already been at it for a few years by then. Rather than just try to describe the music as usual, let's see what we can check out over here. All right, so there you go with a little bit of Heavy Load. Heavy Load always had a pretty good sound. Sometimes I'm in the mood for them, sometimes I'm not. But they're known for having that kind of ringing guitar sound, very anthemic, very catchy, good hooks in a lot of their music. And even here at the end of their sort of original career, they were still turning out some good songs like that. Now, the song on the flip side, Monsters of the Night, that song's a little bit goofy. It's got some kind of squishy 80s keyboard synth things going on. It's got kids kind of chanting the title of the song in the chorus. It's fun. I like it, but it is a bit cheesy. But I'm Alive. That one rocks pretty good. All right, let's go a few years earlier in first wave of Swedish heavy metal and talk about Behemoth. Now, no, it is no connection to any other band named Behemoth that came along later and did other things. This is kind of the OG Behemoth. The guys got there first. They didn't copyright the name properly, so when they got back together, they realized they couldn't perform under the name Behemoth and had to do something different. But this is their first single, which has the songs Death Wings and Vengeance on it. So with a name like Behemoth, two song titles like that, and a big dragon-looking thing on your picture sleeve, you're figuring their true heavy metal street cred has got to be pretty high up there, and it indeed is. let's check out a little bit of Death Wings and see what we're dealing with here. All right, there you go. Behemoth rocking it out with Death Wings. Now, a little thing to note about Behemoth, they did actually record a demo as well. They didn't last very long after the single came out, but there is a demo recording too. It's been a long time since I listened to the demo. I remember it being fairly good though. So these guys did have more than just 2 songs before they called it a day. Another thing, if you want to track down a vinyl copy of the Behemoth 7-inch, you will see a lot of copies that have the same picture sleeve, but it's a red and white color scheme instead of the black and white color scheme I'm showing here. This is the original first pressing of the single. The red and white version was done about a year later, around 1983, on Bullet Records. So same 2 songs, music still is just fine, but it is technically a second pressing, not the first. All right, let's move on to number 3. This is one I like a lot, and I never see anybody mention this band. The band is named Depzon, which I'm guessing is Swedish for true heavy metal warriors, or Sword of Steel, or I don't know, pick something that sounds appropriately heavy metal, and we'll pretend it means that, because I'm American and foreign languages are not our thing. But regardless, this is Depzon. This is their only recording. It has the songs Flying on the Sundown and Lost in the Forest on it. The second one is not a cover of the Cure song. This one was recorded in '85, same year as the Heavy Load single, and it was on this label called Platina Records. And a lot of these first wave of Swedish heavy metal singers are on that label. This was a pretty prolific label that put out a lot of stuff. Different things I've read here and there, like over at the Corroseum, indicate that Platina was kind of a cheap label. Things weren't necessarily cataloged or put together very well, but they did at least get the records out there. So let's give a listen to a little bit of Flying on the Sundown. So there's a little bit of Depzon. This is a single I really like a lot. As you can imagine, some of these obscure Swedish singles, they're a bit of a pain to track down if you're not in Sweden. And some of them are even hard to find within Sweden. So I have had some good luck over the years trading with some European collectors, so that I've been able to fill out my collection with some of these Swedish singles, because I had weird stuff from the United States that they can't find in Sweden. And so we got a little international exchange going there. You may have noticed the back of the Depzon picture sleeve is just completely blank. No pictures, no information, no address. Kind of a bummer. But again, it highlights that. A lot of times, these bands were small-time acts. They had real limited budgets, couldn't put a lot together in terms of graphics and stuff. And again, Platina didn't have a reputation for doing big-budget productions anyway, from what I've heard. All right, a couple more to go, so let's move on to number 4 here. And this is a band called Scamps. And their single is 2 tracks on it. It has Love Today, Hate Tomorrow, and Crystal Eyes. Pretty decent picture sleeve here. Kind of a thing you'd expect to see on 80s heavy metal. Scamps, not the most heavy metal moniker you could have picked for your band. You get the sense that they were trying to come up with something that sounded like punks, and something got lost in the translation a little bit, and so they came up with Scamps, which sounds more cute than dangerous. It's like, you little scamps. You've probably got the safety pin actually in your diaper instead of stuck through your ear. You're one step away from calling yourselves the Little Rascals at that point. But let me stop goofing off about their name and let you check out a little bit of Crystal Night. They may be just a little bit silly, but music, pretty good. All right, so as you can hear, that one's got everything you could want in classic 80s European metal. It's got that good speedy gallop to it, very anthemic, sing-along, very catchy. So really good stuff. The song on the flip side, Love Today, Hate Tomorrow, it's got a little bit more of a pacier feel to it. It's still a good chanting, sing-along type number, but not as speedy as that one. Doesn't have that same zip to it, but I still like it. Okay, last single for today. Probably do another video with more singles in the future, but 5 singles at a time I've been noticing seems to be a pretty good length for these videos. So we'll stop after this 5th one today. This is one of the really good ones from the scene. This is the Gotham City 7-inch. Now, Gotham City is one of the better known bands that came out of Sweden during the first wave of Swedish heavy metal. This is the band that went on to do the Black Ritz EP and the Unknown album, both of which are held in pretty high regard by most fans of early 80s heavy metal stuff. The vocalist, Anders Zachrisson, went on to sing on the first several Nocturnal Rites albums. Those are some of the best power metal albums that came out of Sweden there in kind of like the mid and late 90s. So, without further ado, let's check out a quick sample of Gotham City. This is the song, also called Gotham City, and takes off really good right at the beginning. Love this intro.
Gotham City where life is fun. I'm looking for a lady who wants me to fool around. The prophecy of life on my 14-inch wheels. Rich Reaching for the glory, I wanna know how it feels. Every time I move it around, it really be down in the mountains.
All right, there's a little bit of Gotham City Smoking On, the track named after the band. Love that opening guitar thing, just hooks you immediately. That one gets me going pretty good. Couple of quick things on the Gotham City single. This one, you'll see copies on colored vinyl, both yellow and clear vinyl. Those are boots made in like the mid 90s. The original, have seen a pressing size mention of about 300 copies. It does seem to be a pretty hard one to track down and find, so I'm guessing it was a pretty limited print run. The bootleg will still, people try to sell it for a pretty good price, but it is not an official release, and it's not an old 80s release either. So if you want it, that's fine. Just be aware of what you are getting. You will see this one listed sometimes for pretty crazy prices. I just checked before starting the recording of this video, and there's one copy of this on Discogs right now for over $1,000. I don't think that's a realistic price for the record at all. I actually kind of know the fellow who's selling it in Greece. No offense to him, but I don't think he's going to get that kind of price. That's where, you know, hey, you've got a rare record. You start out at a high price, but maybe you just hope to get a good offer for it and you negotiate something in between. It's rare. People like it and want to get it, but I don't consider this $1,000 single myself. Hey, maybe I'm wrong and people are lining up to buy it, but again, always be careful when you look at stuff on Discogs or other websites. People can ask whatever price they want for a record. You know, I can take Captain and Tennille's greatest hits and try to ask $1,000 for it. That doesn't mean anybody's going to pay that much for it. You want to look at the sale prices, things that have actually sold and the transaction is done, not the price tag people are asking. A lot of times that's just to get attention, or again, maybe hope that somebody will come along and be like, can't pay that, but here's an offer, and you work out a sale that way. So anyway, let's wrap it up there with Gotham City. Video's long enough. So let's keep talking metal in the comments down below. What are your favorite Swedish releases from the early 1980s? Are you a Heavy Load fan? Overdrive fan? Some other band I didn't mention today, like Axwitch, perhaps? Any of these singles catch your ear? Any that you'd really like to hear or see me discuss in the future? I don't have a real extensive collection of these singles. Again, not easy to come by. They don't necessarily demand a big price tag. They're just hard to obtain in the United States. But I'm sure we'll do another video sometime. And if there's something you'd like to hear mentioned, I'll see what I can do. Okay, so until then, everybody stay safe, take care, and keep banging your heads.